Hi, everyone. Thank you very much. So in the past few days, you actually heard a lot about the space cyber ranges, and this project will help space operators and space companies to protect against cyber attacks. But if you want to protect against cyber attacks or train how to defend your system against cyber attacks, you need to know a bit what you're up against, what is the threat landscape, what is going on. So you need to know real-life examples. So with Eric, I don't know if he's here in the room, yes, Eric, we worked to create a database of real-life cases of cyber attacks against the space sector. And so I will explain a bit how we did it, and actually how difficult it is to count attacks against the space sector. Because you probably know that decision makers, they want to know how much the space economy is worth. And they want one number, how much the space economy is worth. And it's actually hard to calculate. And it's the same for the threat landscapes. They want to know how many attacks is targeting the space sector right now, or in the past. Any kind of attacks, kinetic, non-kinetic, electronic, and cyber. So we tried to gather data, and it's not that easy. And even the White House says it's not that easy, because in January 2025, they released a report that is the result of some consultation with the space industry in the US, but also in Europe. And they said that many space companies and agencies believe that information on space cyber threat is inconsistent, untimely, not actionable, lacking context, and in some cases, overclassified. So yeah, that's kind of difficult to access cyber threat intelligence about the space sector. And the level of access to that kind of information is quite varying. Even for big space companies, it's actually an issue. And you have limited existing commercial space cybersecurity threat intelligence products that are in the market right now. So we looked a bit at, are there any public database about cyber attacks and other types of attacks against the space sector? So they are, but they have completely different ways of counting, completely different technologies, methodologies, and widely different numbers. And it doesn't mean that one is right or one is wrong. They're all portraying a certain vision of the threat landscape, and they're all right in their own methodologies, but it's a bit difficult to then know what's actually going on in space and what is the actual threat landscape. So, for example, in 2020, NASA released a report declaring over 1,700 cyber incidents just in 2020 alone. Of course, they don't give you a list with full details about each attack and what happened. So it's a bit difficult to exactly know what that means. And in their methodology, they also count loss and theft. So if you lose your phone and you're a NASA employee, they count this as a cyber incident. ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organizations, they declared in an interview that they face 100 cyber attacks per day. So that's a lot. But they also don't give any examples of what those kind of cyber attacks are. Space ISAC in the US, they also said that they record about 100 attacks per week in 2024. One of our colleagues created a blog and, as a hobby, recorded 70 attacks against the space sector between 1977 and 2019. It includes anti-satellite tests, electronic warfare, cyber attacks, etc. So that was a good start. And then in 2025, ENISA, the EU Space Cybersecurity Agency, they published a space threat landscape report to try to understand what is the current state of the threat landscape in space and how can Europe protect itself. And they reuse, actually, the previous database that I mentioned, and they added a few high-profile examples. So it's really great that ENISA is doing this kind of reports, because that means they get interested into the topic. But it's also not good enough that a public agency is using a database that was created as a hobby by one of our colleagues to define its perception of the threat landscape. Like, I think we can do better. When it comes to cyber attacks, you also have some private actors that are trying to map the threat landscape. And so Cyber Inflight, who is here in the room, is also developing a database and having good numbers of 599 cyber attacks between 1977 and 2024. So that's also a good number. But we don't have a full database of all kinds of attacks: kinetic, non-kinetic, electronic, and cyber. You also have some examples, like Secure World Foundation is each year releasing a report and counting rendezvous proximity operations, anti-satellite tests, and so on, but you don't have something comprehensive. So we try to do that, but it's actually not that easy, so there's a lot of challenges. The first challenge, and I will show you the numbers we got, but first I'm talking about the challenges. The first challenge is the uneven access to data. So usually when cyber attacks happen against satellites, against the space sector, space companies, they don't really want to talk about this. And for a long time, the space industry was very secretive. They operated under what we call security by obscurity. So they thought they would stay safe by not talking about it. And also, when you look at cybersecurity companies like Mandiant, Microsoft, CrowdStrike, and the likes, they don't really produce products about space cybersecurity. They don't even consider space as a standalone sector. So usually, if you want to track, if you're a space company and you want to find attacks against the space sector, so you have a vision of the threat landscape, you kind of have to get attacks and look at the environmental sector for attacks on meteorological institutes and Earth observation. If it's about cyber attacks against satellite communication, maybe it's going to be categorized by cybersecurity companies as internet service providers or telecommunication. Sometimes attacks against the space sector, they're categorized in aviation and aerospace. Sometimes they're categorized in defense and space. But you don't really have a standalone space category. And then you also, when it comes to kinetic attacks, have a lack of space situational awareness data. So we talked a lot about this yesterday, about the importance of having that data. So if you want to spot attacks in space, hostile approaches, you kind of need to know what's going on in orbit. So if you're a space company, you have to buy this data or get access to this data from your government, and this is not so easy. Then you have to, and then it's also what you perceive as an attack or not. Another challenge that, as a researcher who is working with open source data, I'm facing is that it's really hard to do backward mapping, to know what has happened in the past. And it's really hard to recover deleted or altered data. And as I'm doing those investigations with open source data, I'm going through Telegram channels, I'm going to dark websites, I'm going to cybercriminal forums, underground forums. The data is being deleted super quickly, and quicker as months pass by. And this is for several reasons. Law enforcements are taking actions against cybercriminals. So the usual cybercriminal forums where you see a lot of unauthorized access sales, data leaks, data breaches, or some kind of claims from hacktivist groups, they are being taken down. So that means that if you want to go backward and find out some claims from cybercriminal groups targeting the space sector, it's really hard to recover that data. So here is like dark breach forum, which was taken down, and so the data was deleted. Here it's ISS, the Russian cyber criminal forums, that was also taken down. So it's hard to recover that data and then count those cyber attacks. Also, when the CEO of Telegram, Pavel Durov, was arrested, a lot of groups started to switch their channels to private or to delete their channels. Some groups also had their channel deleted due to violations of terms of services. So now you see a lot of groups, they even precise that their channel doesn't breach terms of use. But so sometimes cyber criminal groups or hacktivists, they post a claim about a cyber attack, and then the channel is deleted a few days later. So if you don't monitor live, then you don't record those claims. So in terms of researching and counting attacks, it's definitely a challenge. Then you have legal constraints. So we see in the past few years that states are adopting new mandatory reporting requirements for hackers. So if you're a hacker and you find a vulnerability on a satellite, some states say you have to report that to, thank you. They say you have to report that to intelligence agencies. And you might naively think that it's just to make sure that hackers are doing stuff by the books and they're not doing any malicious things, but actually those rules are just to be exploited by intelligence agencies to conduct offensive operations. And since those rules were adopted, we see a rise of state-sponsored and state actors attacks against any kind of sectors. So why does it matter on the way you count attacks? Is that those hackers that used to gloat about finding vulnerabilities on space systems, now, because of those rules, they don't want to end up in jail, so they might not talk about it online. So that means that you get less information out there. Another challenge is the risk of double counting. You might know about double counting on how you count the space economy. It's the same for cybersecurity. If you count 20 attacks against GNSS receivers, you can count it at 20 attacks, or one cyber campaign against 20 GNSS receiver. And it adds up. If you count this in one way or the other, you end up with radically different numbers that you're going to tell to your decision makers. So at the end, the perception of the threat landscape is completely different. So when you talk to decision makers and they only have 10-15 minutes to understand a topic and understand a threat, that then is maybe going to shape the way space policies and cyber strategies and doctrines are being developed and taught, it kind of matters. So it's just, might seem like unimportant methodological stuff that us researchers are caring about, but actually it might have a policy impact. Another methodological challenge is the specific time during which the database was compiled. So in my research, I focused on two armed conflicts to see how cyber operations were affecting the space sector, like the war in Ukraine and the Israel-Palestine conflicts. And in one case, I did backward mapping, so I went back in time to find information about claims of cyber operations against the space sector, and I found 161 cyber operations against the space sector in the war in Ukraine. Then I looked at another conflict, and I did it by doing real-time monitoring, and I found 237 cyber operations against the space sector. But I know by monitoring the threat landscape, exchanging with the space sector, being part of Space Isaac and so on, that there are actually more attacks in the war in Ukraine against the space sector than in the Israel-Palestine conflict. But because I did real-time monitoring, I was able to find the data before it was deleted for the Israel-Palestine conflict. So there's what you know, and what you don't know. So that's like you have to interpret and explain the challenges because you might find data, but there's a lot of biases in that data. Another example of a challenge on how you count attacks against the space sector is recency bias. So you might have some information unveiled about a cyber attack against a space sector or a space system, but as time goes on, there might be updates or new information about that operation that completely change who conducted the attack and what happened. So here I just put some screenshots of a Telegram channel. This is a very interesting attack that happened during the Wagner rebellion in June 2023. You might, of course, remember that. Well, there was an attack against the satellite network at that moment. And when it happened, random Telegram channel was created, and a guy called Richard V, like Wagner, claimed to have attacked Russian satellite network, those are Teleport. And he said that he targeted the user segment, leaked a lot of screenshots of the IT environment of that company, leaked a lot of documents about that company's agreement with the FSB and their communication protocols. The hacker also leaked some database of all the user modems of that satellite network, and including some that were belonging to the MOD, the FSB, and some that were located in Ukraine. But when this happened, none of the usual Wagner channels reshared that attack. Also, cyber attacks against satellite networks is not really in the playbook of Wagner. That's not really what they do. They don't really have that kind of capabilities. So there was a bit of suspicion of who actually did that. But so far we were like, okay, that's probably maybe Wagner, we don't know. And very recently, in August 2025, the Ukrainian Cyber Alliance, they claimed that they were behind this attack all along. So, and that they intentionally pretended that it was Wagner behind it. And they also said that this attack was a retaliation for the attack against Viasat that took place on the eve of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So why am I bringing this example is that at first we could record this attack as being conducted by this Richard V threat actor, but then 1 year later we know that it was the Ukrainian Cyber Alliance. So that means that when you monitor the threat landscape and you count cyber attacks or generally attacks against the space sector, you constantly have to monitor all your examples and check for updates, because there might be updates. You might gather more information with time, and some information you might discover that actually that didn't happen, or it was not as bad as it was claimed, or that actually there were more damage than previously said. So you constantly have to update your database, and so this is also a challenge. Another challenge in how you count attacks against the space sector is how do you define the scope of the space sector? And here, this is an interesting example I found on the dark web, is an attack against Ciment Guyanais. This is a construction company. And the hackers, they said, this company supplies cement, so concrete, for the launch of the Ariane 6 rocket being built by the European Space Agency. Is it an attack against the space sector or not? It's not a space company, it's just a construction company. It's not a satellite. But this is part of the space supply chain. And the hackers are explicitly mentioning the space sector, so it might also affect some space operations if your suppliers cannot operate anymore. Here it was a ransomware. So how do you count? And if you have dozens of examples like this, the final number of the number of attacks against the space sector that you give to your decision makers is completely different. So that's the kind of questions that you ask yourself when you count attacks against the space sector. Another example here from a group that is called CyberVolk is an attack against the US Geological Survey. They use space-based data, but are they really a space actor? It's like, some people might have different ways of counting this. Another example that is very common in the middle from Killnet, a Russian threat actor, is attacks against aerospace companies. Here it's Boeing. It's like, can we count all attacks against Boeing or Airbus, Lockheed Martin, and the likes as attacks against the space sector? Because they do space, but they also do aviation. So is it an attack against space or aviation or both? And what is the purpose of the threat actor behind that? So again, the way you count completely change your final number. Another example here from No Name is a defense company as well, Rheinmetall. And they also mentioned the space company, the Swiss space company RUAG. So again, is it an attack against the space sector or not? And most of the time, those attacks are conducted as part of wider campaigns against one country, and they don't necessarily mention space activities, or sometimes even groups don't even know that those companies are providing space services. So that's another challenge that we have when we count attacks against the space sector. And finally, the final challenge before I give you some numbers is misinformation. So here are some screenshots of claimed attacks against the space sector. But how do we figure out whether they're real or not? Because you can just lie. You can just say, oh, I hacked a satellite, but you didn't. And here, it's really difficult. So here you have some kind of leak of some sort of code on underground forums of a space conference with personal data leaked. Is it real? Is it a recycled data leak? Did the threat actors just took some old leaks that were online and made it seem like it was new? We don't really know. Another example of Maxar safety, where you see, is from Keynote. This group went a bit on a hiatus, and then they came back and claimed an attack against Maxar. Was it real or not? I don't know. At first, I found an article where there was a disclaimer that this attack was not real, but then the article was not available anymore. So then I don't really know whether it was true or not. The threat actors did not share any kind of information about this attack to prove their claim. So it's a bit difficult. Also, you find here a data leak from the European Space Agency. They claim they have accessed something, but is it real or not? We don't know. So you always have to double check, verify, and space companies, they don't always confirm whether they were attacked or not. So that's also some kind of challenge that you have when you count attacks against the space sector. But even if they're not true, it also indicates something about the threat landscape. That means that threat actors, they are interested in targeting the space sector. They might not have the capabilities, they might not know how to target satellites, but they're interested. And it says something that it's a weak signal for space actors that they should protect themselves. So, how many attacks did we record? And it's just preliminary work, it's not perfect, it's a work in progress, but it's already good. We found 1,115 attacks against the space sector between 1969 and 2025. So there's probably a lot more. It's just the tip of the iceberg. It's only open source data. So disclaimer. So what we see is that there is a massive increase of attacks against the space sector, especially since 2022. 2025 is not over, so this is kind of like half the year maybe. So we definitely see an increase. You might wonder why 2007 is a bit higher. It's because of anti-satellite tests. Then you might wonder also why 2018 is a bit higher. It was also because of the Louche Olympe inspection missions. So again, do you count them as attacks or not? It's up to space actors. What type of attack is the most common? So, as I said, there's what you know, and what you know you don't know. So we recorded a lot of cyber attacks, but what I am sure is that electronic is way, way higher than what is presented here. It's just that it's a bit difficult to track electronic warfare. So we have to improve at this, but this is something that is really occurring on a daily basis. So we know that electronic warfare from data from the private sectors, like last year there were about 310,000 spoofing incidents against commercial aircraft. So that's definitely through the roof here. You might wonder why kinetic is so high, because kinetic attacks don't happen so often in space. It's because of attacks against satellite modems in armed conflicts. So Starlink modems are being destroyed by drone attacks in Ukraine, for example. So there's a lot of those attacks. So this is also a kinetic attack, even if it occurs on Earth. What type of attack is the most common? Well, DDoS. If you're a space company, you probably experience this on a daily basis. You have DDoS against your websites all the time. Some consider this as an attack, or some consider this as just background noise that is happening on a daily basis. But this is the most common attack occurring. Drone strike against satellite user modem, anti-satellite tests. They're not attacks per se, but they create a lot of debris. Data leaks is also very common. Jamming, there's probably way more. And you see, of course, a lot of rendezvous proximity operations. So if we want to count drone attacks on satellite modems, I looked at Telegram videos that soldiers are making on the battlefield, and where in those videos you can sometimes see drone attacks against Starlink user modems being filmed. So based on this data, I've recorded 254 Starlink user modems being destroyed by drones, Ukrainian modems, but this data was interesting because it also showed that each time there is an offensive in the conflict, you see a spike in drone attacks against satellite capabilities, and also that Russia is also using Starlink. So that was an interesting data set. Then sometimes people ask me, is it the actual satellite in orbit that is being targeted by attacks? Most of the time it's not. It's the IT environment of space companies and agencies that is being targeted. It's the user segment and the leak segment for electronic warfare, and the ground segment. But the space segment is not really so much targeted. When it is, it's mostly with kinetic or non-kinetic operations. So that's something that is important to mention. Then which type of system or entity is the most targeted? Starlink, because of the drone attacks. For a lot of examples, you could not really find the target. Sometimes they just say a space company or a space agency. Then Rafael, which is Israeli aerospace and defense company. Rostec, NASA is targeted a lot in context of armed conflict or not. This is kind of a target, and it's very weird sometimes because there's a bit of cognitive dissonance in hacker groups, because they might share photos of the James Webb telescopes and be amazed by space capabilities, but then 2 weeks later they might hack NASA. So that happens. Then who is the most targeted? So it's a bit biased because my research focused on armed conflict, but Ukraine, US, Russia, Israel, and France are the most targeted countries. There's probably a lot more than this. My research focused, of course, on the war in Ukraine and Israel-Palestine conflict, so they are top of the charts here, but maybe the reality is different. And then the most targeted entities are companies. So it's kind of normal, especially considering the amount of commercial space services that are being used in armed conflict. Space agencies are often targeted, and then just government agencies. So sometimes it can be space forces, Air and Space Force, or meteorological institutes, for example. Then the biggest attackers, so what I could find was Russia being the biggest attacker, and some attacks that you see was the dotted box are suspected attacks, but where we don't have a proof whether they're the perpetrators. Again, there's a lot of biases, so I guess that Ukraine, US, China are way higher, but it's just I couldn't find examples, and also there's my own biases because, for example, I don't speak Chinese, so it's much harder to find information. You might wonder why Morocco is so high in the chart. It's because in my research on the Israel-Palestine conflict, there was one hacker group from Morocco that was conducting a lot of DDoS attacks against websites, and among them there were a lot of space companies and space agencies. And when you look at the type of countries that are here, you also clearly see that a lot of those attacks are occurring in the context of armed conflict. But then what matters is not necessarily where those hackers are from, but who they are supporting. And so here again, you see that most attacks are coming from groups that support Russia, Palestine, Ukraine, Palestine, Iran. Those are from the Iran war of this summer, where a lot of attacks against the space sector, electronic, cyber occur. So that's not a perfect database, it's just a start, but at least it gives a bit of information about what is the threat landscape in the space sector. So if you have any questions, just feel free to ask.
Do we have any questions? There is a question.
You say Morocco, and you're saying that as very significant, but you don't know that that's not somebody going via Morocco. So in terms of the value of the information, is that a valuable fact?
Well, as I said, there's a lot of biases, and you might not always know. A lot of cyber, so the threat actors is called Mr. Hamza. It's threat actors that was identified by a lot of cybersecurity companies as being based in Morocco, and also based on the Telegram channel that they have. There's a lot of references to Morocco, so that is probable that they are based there, but they might also lie, so that's a possibility always.
What do we draw or derive from the fact that it's Morocco?
Well, it's in my research, I monitor these threat actors, they target the space sector because they support Palestine, so that's why they conduct their operations. So the fact that they're based in Morocco is an information, it's not necessarily relevant. So as I said, what matters is really who they support rather than where they're based.
Paul.
Yes, thank you for that very good presentation, as always. And I would ask you that which space cyber attack would it be?
I should have expected that question.
So these questions come from Paul then. I recognize the style. My favorite ones.
Thank you for buying me time. Maybe I would be a ransomware, because there has been no ransomware against satellites yet. This is not something that happened because it's actually quite dangerous. There's a lot of constraints that you don't have with the ransomware on Earth and in space. And in space, you need to be sure that you can trigger an attack while retaining access to the satellite and being confident that you can if the victim pays the ransom, that you can give back the access to the satellite to the operator, and that might not be that easy in space. So you would have to have a very curated, precise payload in the sense of like malware that you're going to deploy. So it was proven by researchers that it's feasible to conduct a ransomware attack against a satellite, but it never occurred so far. Hopefully, it never happens.
So I saw a question from Jan there first, and then we're going to continue.
Yes, so wonderful work. You have been taking really deep dive into the topic, and this is fascinating. My question is, however, one of your research outcomes is that squeezing this into a single number, attack against space is maybe not reasonable. Would you be able to propose any other kind of indicators or parameters which would be more reasonable and giving a bit more the picture what actually happens? Because this is like, yes, number is this, but, and then there you have like several pages of stuff. So is there anything which we could do?
I love this question. This is a really good question, and I agree with you that we're a bit in a society where we need to count everything and quantify everything and put labels on everything.
It's because of the journalists.
And so, of course, then those numbers, they might not fully represent what's going on. So I think the solution is the hard one, is that there's no shortcut to understand the threat landscape. It's like you need to read, you need to spend a lot of time, you need to contextualize, understand history, understand state doctrines, how they operate in space, how threat actors are operating, who they are, and so on, to fully understand what's going on. And it takes a lot of time, and you cannot summarize this just with a single a number. So this is just the surface to give a number. Nobody is really trying to create those databases. So it's kind of just a first step, and everyone that can give more information and context is welcome to do that.
Just a short one. Would it be possible to calculate economic losses because of the activity, like a gross product thing? Well, this year we were losing like 200 million because of that cyber attacks in Russia, in Ukraine, somewhere.
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. It's probably feasible. I'm not an economist, so I don't know how this would happen, but that would be definitely a useful number, so that the space sector, which long overlooked cybersecurity, would understand that cybersecurity is actually a comparative advantage, and that being cybersecure is good for your bottom line, and that if you are not including any cybersecurity, you will get attacked and you will lose money in the end. So there was actually one example in 2013 in Australia where they didn't have any cybersecurity at all, and they got attacked by a state actor, and they went bankrupt afterwards because it was too costly to repair the system and then invest in producing satellites. So
That's a good selling point for a cybersecurity company, isn't it? Put that on your ad. Do we have more questions? Go ahead.
Well, sort of a follow-up of what Jan was asking. I mean, as you now know, I represent a space company. I see 1,115 attacks in a time span of more than my lifetime. How much, based on that number, it's an impossible question, based on that number, how much do I need to invest in my company to avoid cyber attacks? In other words, how relevant is this number? That's what Jan says.
So, of course, this is the tip of the iceberg, and there's probably way, way more. It's just it's not available in open source research and data. So I don't know how many attacks space companies or your space company is facing. So it's a bit difficult to know. And what is your threat model? Like, who are your clients? Are you providing services and products to defense customers, belligerents in armed conflict, where is the company based, and so on. So all this really, truly matters. So it's more about understanding the context, so also that you can update your threat model based on how a situation evolves, so that you can protect yourself. But then it really is a case-by-case basis.
Let me make it a little bit more reasonable. How can this information help me as a space company invest in this and then sell it to my clients as something that you were saying, Johannes, as a value add? I can make my product twice as expensive, which is good for my bottom line, with the argument that it's super cyber secure. How is this information going to help me?
Well, space companies for a long time, they thought that they could not be affected by cyber attacks. They thought that their satellite is up there and nobody's gonna hack that, and space is for science, so why would someone even try to hack that? The threat is here, and as I said in the presentation, the entry point is not your satellite, it's your IT environment. It's your ground station, your user modem. So you need to secure that because those attacks are occurring on a daily basis. And if I was able, as a French girl in the middle of Switzerland looking at some weird Telegram channels on my own with no budget, and I was able to find this, the reality is probably much bigger. So some space companies are targeted on a daily basis. So then you need to invest on cybersecurity. But I'm just a researcher, so I have nothing to sell.
Thank you so much. We have one last question. Okay, go ahead.
While doing this research, are you also compiling something similar to CVE database out of space vulnerability attacks? And actually, that might be the answer to the previous question, too.
This is a good question. Also, CVE on space systems or software that are used by space companies also give a good indication of the potential attack surface and the potential vulnerabilities of the space sector. But just finding the vulnerability does not necessarily mean they're exploited. But we see, in general, in cyber, that the time to exploitation of discovered vulnerabilities is kind of negative now because of AI. So you see a lot more exploitation of vulnerabilities because threat actors can find those vulnerabilities much faster because of AI. So that's a good point, and like mapping vulnerabilities is also very important.
Clémence, thank you so much for an excellent presentation, and thank you for the relevant questions as well.